and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we conclude our 32 for 32 series with a look at the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, one hell of a regular season, 14-2. Only reason they had that second loss because they did not give a single shit in Week 17. Go on the playoffs. We had the anything is possible win over the Browns. Dominant display over the Bills. Unfortunately, a 22-point loss to Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, in American football, only one team a year gets to call themselves champions. That was not the Chiefs in 2020, 2021, but might just be next season, because as long as you have the best player alive in Patrick Mahomes, you always have a chance to hoist that Lombardi trophy at the end of the season. But just like any team, there are plenty of holes that they can fill, upgrade throughout the offseason. And I have a very special guest on today to try to help me figure out just exactly what those holes are. He is host of the program, and you can hear him on Sports Radio 810 WHB. Soren Petro, you can follow on Twitter at Soren Petro, SorenPetro. Soren, thanks for the time, man. Happy offseason.
Yeah, appreciate it. Good to be with you. And while it wasn't the final ending that everybody in Kansas City wanted, this is a franchise that before 2019 had never had the Lamar Hunt Trophy in their building. So I know it seems like, you know, when you've been to the Super Bowl, why would just winning the AFC be something? But for this franchise, I mean, that was a drum I beat for a long time. How can you have the founder of the AFL, the man who the AFC trophy is named after, and it's never been in your building? And the Chiefs did get that for a second consecutive year. So there is still, now that the initial licking of the wounds is over, an appreciation for it was still a season, a historic season for this franchise.
The Chiefs can literally walk into 30 different NFL stadiums with their heads held high as the rightful champions. Unfortunately, if they got Tampa Bay, they might have someone to say something about that. So truly a great place, just not number one, unfortunately.
That's right. Yeah, Devin White will always have something to say. Should there be a rematch next year, he will be a guy that will be a focal point. There's no doubt.
Fingers crossed, man. That'd be great. Well, everyone, as usual, we're going to go through three team needs. First, I'm going to hit Soren with some workload-related questions, and we'll close things out with a bold offseason take. We're recording this on March 9th, so, got some crazy moves flying around here just before free agency gets started, but tentatively hoping we'll be just fine by the time this gets published here at the end of the week. So, Soren, how about you start things off with your top three team needs for the Chiefs ahead of this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as a team, right, it's offensive line number one. I mean, I think some people joke around and say it's 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to put it all on the offensive line. It's tackle, it's guard, and it's center. If you look at what they have under contract right now, they've got two hurt tackles. Both of them past 30 years old. Eric Fisher coming off an Achilles tendon, and Mitchell Schwartz coming off back surgery. The Chiefs say they'll both be ready for camp, or at least Eric Fisher mid-August. But that had everybody, I know when Brett Veach said that, scratching their head saying, whoa, wait a minute, this is supposed to be a 9 to 12-month injury. That's 6.5 months after surgery. And that seems like a very aggressive timeline. And I think people are kind of left to speculate what was the point of that. I think maybe to sell other teams that they're not as desperate for offensive tackles as people might think. I think there are two big question marks with two big paydays at that offensive tackle spot. So that is number one. We saw what happened. The Chiefs did a great job of masking one tackle throughout the course of the year. But when it got to the Super Bowl and they lost the second one, it wasn't just Eric Fisher means all that, although I believe they're 23-1 in their last 2 years when Eric Fisher plays. They are 4-6, I think, when he doesn't. So, that's the value of the left tackle spot for this team, and with all the other problems, guards going down and everything else. Their center is a free agent. Their backup center is a free agent. The only center on the roster right now is Daryl Williams, an unsigned rookie free agent last year who was on the practice squad. Now, there's been some talk of Nick Allegretti, who started at left guard, moving over to center, which would obviously be a problem at left guard when you consider that the guy who was starting at right guard is coming back from a year off, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif, who opted out. That's some help that they can get at guard. And Lucas Niang, last year's third-round pick, is another guy that they projected to maybe be a guard when they had their two tackles healthy. Now, clearly, point A, they have needs at tackle. He's probably going to have to fill one of those spots. And I think there's always a question with both those guys coming back. I mean, the pandemic is not over. We'll see where we're at. Do they opt out again? Does LDT, who went to fight the pandemic in Canada as a medical doctor, and is Lucas Niang comfortable with where we are, and does he come back? The Chiefs tell me, by all accounts, they think everybody, including Damian Williams, who opted out as well, are expected to be back. So those guys, those two will help on that offensive line, but Andrew Wiley's a restricted free agent as well, the starting right guard for most of last year. So they've got a lot to do on the offensive line. You can either call that one or tackle, guard, center. But that's a big one. Then I think, they would love to add to the wide receiving core. And I think from a fantasy perspective, people are going to say that. And I know from listening to, Eric Eager and George Cheruri on the PFF forecast and how they, they're going to take wideouts with like picks 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. 20.
Build those offenses up.
Exactly. They always want the firepower. And I think there is a need. But, we saw they had pretty good weapons out on the field against the Bucs, and if you can't keep your quarterback on his feet, that's a problem. So I think that gets pushed down. They're also optimistic about Mecole Hardman taking a step in this next season. So even though they lose Sammy Watkins and Demarcus Robinson, I think you'd look at wideout and say that's number 2. But in reality, I think the Chiefs will say defensive end is number 2. They're going to lose Alex Okafor. They're going to lose Tano Passanio, or at least they're free agents. They're going to have to go to work in negotiating a deal with them. Michael Dana played very well as a late-round pick rookie last year and stepped in, kind of the guy to do all the dirty work, not get the flash and big sack totals, but be the guy that will run the schemes, run the stunts, stay home, set the edge. He did a really nice job and surprised a lot of people with that work, but I still think edge is a big, big need for them. And then I think linebacker, they really like Willie Gay Jr. They knew it was going to be a slow go for him. He was the one that was hurt the most by not being able to have a training camp, but they think he's going to fill that outside spot. And really today, you almost only play with 2 linebackers, and they're so hard to find in college. I've talked to a lot of scouts, everybody's in 4 wide and 5 wide, and linebackers are coming off the field. Finding real NFL linebackers is tough. But Anthony Hitchens has probably only got 1 more year for the Chiefs at the middle linebacker. So I think middle linebacker is a spot that they need to address. Could be something that could help this year, but definitely over the horizon. So I think the Chiefs will look at their board and they will say offensive line first and foremost, edge on the defensive line second, linebacker third. But I think wide receiver is a spot that with this great wide receiver class, if there's some depth that's there and they look around and they say, all right, we did a pretty good job getting some street free agents to fill some of these other spots, and this is a guy we can't pass on. Brett Veach and Andy Reid with Patrick Mahomes chirping from the background. I think wide receiver is always a wild card for them as we get towards the draft.
And look, all due respect to Sammy Watkins, some of the things he pulled off in the playoffs, he had those week 1 blow performances that, fantasy managers usually had him on the bench. We can at least appreciate the numbers he put up. I mean, not a bust by any stretch, but the amount of money they paid him, that original deal, something like, I think it was like $16 million per year or something like that. Yep. Like that was a hell of a lot of money. And they didn't exactly get that, and through injuries and many of other reasons, they didn't get that consistent high-end producer. It's scary to think what this offense could be like if they hadn't of, quote unquote, botched that signing, or at least I got in a healthier, more consistent version of Sammy. I'm happy to hear you say that they have higher expectations from Mecole Hardman in year 3. A lot of people forget. I mean, this guy didn't start playing wide receiver until halfway his career at Georgia. I know sometimes when he's out there, he looks like, I don't want to say a one-trick pony, but some more of like a gadget guy that you need to kind of design the ball to be less like a pure wide receiver. It sounds like they're confident as he continues to learn the position. He's not going to become Tyreek Hill because there's only one freaking Tyreek Hill in the league. But at a minimum, we can expect him to be in 2 wide receiver, 3 wide receiver sets or more consistency moving forward.
Yeah, I think the focal point it will be for him to be the number 2 wide receiver, right? And I think Tyreek Hill will be number 1, and he'll bump up to that number 2 spot. They do like Byron Pringle as well. And if you go into deeper leagues, like my Dynasty League, we roster, 27 plus injuries. You can get up to where you have 32, 34 guys. We start 3 to 5 wide receivers. So if you're in one of those deeper leagues and a Dynasty League, then Byron Pringle is a guy to have your eye on. Probably somebody's rostered him here or there at times in your league, but he's a guy that's going to bump up as well. When I talked to the guys about the wide receiving core, they said, they immediately went to Mecole Hardman and talked about they think he's going to have a big year and going to have a breakout year. Now, I'll come back to that in a second. Maybe a reason why, could that be lip service more than real validation ultimately? But they said Byron Pringle is just so steady. And so they really like what he gives them. They know what he gives them. He becomes by far their most physical receiver, right? Sammy Watkins, there was an amazing stat going into, it didn't hold up in 2020, but going into 20, they averaged almost a yard per carry more when Sammy Watkins was on the field than when he wasn't.
Wow.
He's an underrated blocker. He's physical. He is the kind of wide receiver. They don't really have that 6'4", small forward that can post guys up in the end zone. But the closest thing they had to it, a guy who maybe could go beat some hand fighting and wrestle his way open in the end zone was Sammy Watkins. And, he was good after the catch. And Byron Pringle, I think, will assume that role. Now, not necessarily as the number 2 wide receiver, but that physical. He is a strong guy. And again, like all Chiefs wide receivers, there's good top-end speed there. So I think Pringle is probably the diamond in the rough. If anyone's going to shock and surprise it'll be Byron Pringle, who was undrafted out of Kansas State, junior college kid. It's like 25 or 6 when he finally got to the Chiefs. So, I mean, it's his time right now to try to make it happen. But they've had him around for a while, and they do like him. But to your point, Hardman and kind of package Sammy Watkins together, they're both kind of these, enigmas, right? Are they successes or failures? Like you mentioned Sammy Watkins from what did you get total yards, touchdowns for $48 million, or they cut his pay by 7. So $41 million over 3 years, not enough to justify that contract.
Right.
But he is one, and this is something maybe to look at for some of the teams with young quarterbacks. The one thing they did, I think Sammy Watkins was one, I believe, not to go too far off the field, but Tyreek Hill's significant other came back into his life, came back into the picture, the mother of his child, and we know what ultimately ended up taking place in that situation. And I think that sent up a red flag, and the Chiefs said, wait a minute. I mean, this was a volatile relationship back in Oklahoma. What do we got here? And Sammy Watkins was brought in. I think they overpaid to have an emergency. We need a guy who can take the top off the defense receiver. I think that's part of how he got here. I think the other thought was, if everything works out, we have all our guys. We have this young quarterback that we've invested a lot in, right? It doesn't seem like much to give up number 27 in next year's first and a third-round pick to go get Patrick Mahomes now. It's no-brainer, right? But he went 10th for a reason. There were people that said he's going to be a turnover machine. His footwork's terrible. That offense doesn't work in the NFL. So it was a bolder move than I think history will remember it as, because he's been so successful. And I think part of what they said was, let's give him every weapon possible. Like, we have to get the quarterback right. Let's overpay on the offensive side. We'll sacrifice the defense, and let's give him every weapon to grow him. Let's take no ceiling away from this kid. Let's let him reach for the stars. And of course, that first year, 5,050, he did it. And that's a confidence. Can you do a double dot? Can you do a double flip off the high dive? I don't know until I've done it. But once I've done it, I might not get it the next 2, 3, 4, 5 times, but I know I can do it. So he knows he can throw 5,000. He knows he can go for 50, and that confidence, I think, was big. So Watkins played that role, and you mentioned he came up big in the playoffs and in the run and in the Super Bowl and in the 19 Super Bowl. So he'll always that contract gets a pass from Chiefs fans, even though monetarily you didn't see the production. So there's this kind of weird, yes, overpaid, but came through when we needed it, did what we needed him to do. Well, when Mecole Hardman, you get a bottom of the second round wide receiver who has 7 touchdowns in his rookie season, has, 4 or 5 plays of over 50 yards for touchdowns, has a rush for over 50 yards for a touchdown, completes this dynamic offense and gives you yet another weapon. You go, that's a success. It's when you scroll down a few more names and go, oh, DK Metcalf was there. Nobody says JJ Arcega-Whiteside went next, and they didn't make that mistake, right? They scroll on down. DK Metcalf went a few picks later. And so every wideout in front of DK Metcalf, all the way up to at least N'Keal Harry, is considered a bust. And so he's not a bust. He hasn't been what you'd want him to be. He hasn't delivered on the flashes. They feel like he's going to be that he's still going to be. Now, is he going to be DK Metcalf? No. But could he be, Deshaun Jackson? That's I think more kind of a what they would hope for. 1,100 yards, but with 17, 18 yards per catch, 8 touchdowns, most of them of the long variety, be a threat on those end arounds that the Chiefs love to run. And I think that's a possibility with Tyreek Hill on the other side. So, is it lip service because they know DK Metcalf they passed on and they should have taken him like everybody else? Is it hope more than belief? I think there's probably a little bit of both in there, but he's certainly going to get the opportunities, which is one of the things we're all looking for in fantasy football.
I mean, there are 31 teams other than the Seahawks, including the Seahawks. All 32 teams wish they had DK Metcalf on their roster. Credit the Seahawks for not passing on him more than one time. But yes, no, it's a very good point with Mecole. But literally, you throw the ball at the guy and good things happen. Only Justin Jefferson and A.J. Brown have averaged more yards per target than Mecole over the past 2 seasons. It's a low target qualifier. I'm not saying Mecole is as good as those guys. But again, we just don't have these big examples of them, feeding him opportunities and not much happening with those plays. So great to hear he should get more run here in 2021.
One thing to your point, one of the things that was said to me is when you feel like you're only going to get 2 balls thrown your way in a game because of how the game plan's set up and you drop the first one, it's really tough to have a big day. You start trying to have that big day all at once. And I think that's a great point. I mean, I think that the fact that he should be now factored into 5, 6, 7 touches, I think maybe calms him down, maybe makes him a little bit more efficient. He's got to refine his route running. There's still plenty of work and to your point, there's reason to believe he will because he's fairly new to the position.
It's just, when you have 2 guys as fast as him and Tyreek on the field, we talk about speed kills, but there was this play against the Browns. I think it was the first first drive, it was like 4th and 1, maybe 3rd and 1 near the goal line. And they have Mecole flying across, the field, potential pop pass. He flies. And then we got Tyreek in the backfield who ends up taking a sweep the other way. And it's like, you got two of the fastest guys in the NFL going in opposite directions. How are the Browns even supposed to deal with that? Of course they couldn't. And I'm imagining, again, with another offseason, with hopefully more full-time role, more motivated Mecole, we see the best of him yet. Now, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you did not expect Sammy Watkins to be back with the Chiefs. If you could clarify that. And then also Demarcus Robinson, who was an unrestricted free agent as well.
Yeah, Sammy Watkins, I think they've kind of gone as far as they can go. And I think really for a lot of the Chiefs veterans on both sides of the ball, they would love to have just about all of them back, but they're going to have to come back on league minimum or slightly above league minimums. There's one or two guys here and there, but Damien Wilson at linebacker, Daniel Sorensen at safety, who's done a great job basically being a dime linebacker for the Chiefs, and kind of played all over as a Swiss Army knife and completed that secondary, which was amazingly good with a lot of corners that were not highly invested in, but played very well. Their secondary was really one of the strengths of the team. But there are a lot of guys that I think they'd like to have back, but they kind of made their plan last year, and that was, the run it back tour, bring everybody back, including Chris Jones, including extending Travis Kelce, getting Patrick Mahomes signed. And when they did that, they went to what I call a Stars and Jags approach. I mean, you can have 4 or 5 guys that are up at the highest paid of their position. Anthony Hitchens is up there. Frank Clark is a $20+ million defensive lineman. Chris Jones now $20+ million defensive lineman. Mitchell Schwartz is $14 million at one tackle, $16 million at the other for Eric Fisher. That's a lot of money. They've got all these guys that are paid. Well, that means you've got to make it go with league minimum and first-year contracts, right? That's where it's going to have to happen. And I think now a lot of those guys that are ready to get paid, they've cycled off, and there are built-in raises for all those stars that mean that they've got to find cheaper options. And so Watkins, I think the expectation is he'll find a better deal. I mean, I think the Chiefs will be offering one for a couple of million with maybe some incentives that they could kick over to next year. But they've got even more cap coming next year. They're anticipating the TV deal raising the cap. But they've already spent it. They're in a win now mode, but can't really add much to it. Although we'll get to our bold prediction. I'll give you one that might be one that would shock some people. But I do think that Watkins is just going to be too much. Somebody will take a shot on the up end, those big games that he has every now and then, and say, well, maybe we can unlock the potential. Why you would think that after Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid couldn't get the consistency out of it? Good luck with it. But I think he moves on. Demarcus Robinson, I think, could be brought back. He was on the free agent market last year, didn't get what he wanted to get out of it, thought he would be offered a starting job somewhere, came back to the Chiefs. They did spend a little over $2 million on him, but they used their cap exemption to cut that by over $1 million. I think a league minimum, if nobody's interested in Demarcus Robinson, I think the Chiefs would like him back, maybe a little bit more than the league minimum, but they're not going to break the bank. If somebody says, hey, this is a guy that can be our number 2, he's going to be there because the money differential will just be too big.
Definitely going to be an underrated storyline to watch out for. We can all expect Mecole, to get more opportunities, but we'll all feel a lot better about it if Watkins and Robinson are taking their talents elsewhere for sure. And credit to Sammy Watkins. I mean, the guy hasn't turned 28 years old until June 14th. Feels like he's been in the league forever at this point, but hopefully he still has plenty of good years ahead. Great stuff, Soren. Again, there's other team needs. We're offensive line and looking at edge, and we could also use a little bit of help at linebacker as well. To your point, when you kind of have this Stars and Jags approach, which I like that terminology there, you do kind of need to have just these, needs elsewhere. But when you have Patrick Mahomes under center, you're betting on the Stars, carrying the squad. And I think that's a pretty good bet to make based on their success over the past 3 years. Great stuff. Again, everyone, we're recording this on March 9th. So now for these next few questions, Soren cannot predict the future, but we're asking him to do his best as things stand right now. And first thing, I want to look at this running back room because you said that Damian Williams is expected to opt back in next year. Clyde Edwards-Helaire was someone that disappointed a lot of fantasy football managers. I tried to stick up for him the best I could. There was this, he started the year like 0 for 6 on carries inside the 5-yard line, but you look at those carries and like short of Reggie Bush flying over, 20 guys, I don't think anyone was going to score. You had the issues where he just, wasn't ripping off huge runs, but if you look at the broken tackle metrics, he was doing well.
Right.
He played well. He just didn't have the massive counting numbers that a lot of people drafted him in the first round to ultimately put up. With that said, now Damian Williams, 2 touchdowns, Super Bowl hero, obviously been very consistent in his time with the Chiefs. He's back. Do you expect this to be a fairly split 2-back committee, or do you see one of these between Clyde and Damian having the early lead?
Running backs don't stay healthy. And so, handcuffs would be a good idea with these two, because I think there's a good chance that one of them will be the guy on a given day. Daryl Williams factors in there as well. And I think one of the things that could happen, Daryl Williams is a much more limited runner. I heard Eric Eager say, he loves running backs with how did he put it? With an ego problem or with a self-esteem problem. And his point was, if you don't think you're a superstar and you think you've got to do all the little things just to stay on the team, you make yourself a better, more productive running back. And I thought that was a great theory. And Daryl Williams, he said, it's probably not the nicest way to put it, but it makes the point, right? And Daryl Williams did that. He picks up the blitz. He catches the football when it's thrown to him. You have to be able to catch the ball in Andy Reid's system. And he gets what you give him plus a little bit more. He puts his head down and he gets tough yardage. But he never messes around losing 4 yards when he could have had 2. And I think he's steady Eddie there. And so that was a dangerous combination to have with a rookie running back that is learning blitz pickup from the NFL level. And that's always going to hinder him. Learning a pretty complicated passing offense. He did a great job catching the ball at LSU. And there were some intricacies to it. And I think it's fair to say Clyde Edwards-Helaire probably disappointed most everybody. I don't know that he disappointed the Chiefs, because do you want to take the ball out of Tyreek Hill's hand? Do you want to take the ball out of Travis Kelce's hand? There is only one football, right? So, there's that whole dynamic. And I think really, hindsight being 2020, there should have been a lot more Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the Super Bowl, because when your offensive line isn't good enough, grind out some yards. Inside the goal line, the Chiefs don't build an offensive line to get 3rd and goal from the 1. That's not what they do. They really put 4 tackles, and at times when Mitch Morse was their center, Mitch Morse was a 6'5" center. Andy Reid puts tackles on the field to pass protect. He's going to throw the ball. He believes in, and was one of the first to believe in, throw to win, run when you're winning, right? And so I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire has a place in that, and I think he will grow, and I think in the second year he'll be more ready. But then, as you mentioned, now here comes back Damian Williams. He's ready to do more. I think he's skilled enough to have a better year, and I think you're right. The missed tackle numbers, he covered up and was probably a reason why people betting the Chiefs lost, because he covered up how bad the offensive line was at times. And he would make guys miss in the backfield, still get 3 or 4 yards. And you think, oh, this offensive line is fine. When in reality, a combination of Travis Kelce's and Tyreek Hill's and Patrick Mahomes and Clyde Edwards-Helaire's making exceptional plays covered up the inefficiencies of that offensive line. And so if they can make the line better, that would help. Damian Williams will not help. He will hurt if he's back. But I think big picture, again, go to the dynasty side of things. He is the future. And if it's not the future as the number 1 this year, it is in 22. Damian Williams, they have factored in under the cap. And I'd give it an outside shot that Damian Williams ends up getting cut. The Chiefs still have that opportunity to do it. There's no loss on the dollars. I think they'll want Damian Williams, but let's see what else becomes available. And if they do say, okay, we need to clear some money out because we've got this one guy or 2 or 3 guys at a more needed position that we can go get. We can make it go with Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Daryl Williams, and we'll go find some rookies, some undrafted running backs that we can make it fit. Spencer Ware has never done anything in the NFL. He didn't do anything with the Seattle Seahawks, was released. Didn't do anything when the Colts signed him, by the way, to a guy that came from the Chiefs organization who re-signed Spencer Ware. Mm-hmm. He only did something, and for 5 weeks was one of the top running backs in the NFL several years ago, because he was in the Andy Reid offense. Andy Reid can make a lot of running backs look really good. So if Damian Williams is back, it's a tough thing to figure out where all the carries and touches are going to go. But I still think there's an outside chance that he won't be back, because the Chiefs say Andy can work his magic with just about any running back. I mean, Spencer Ware was a guy that was literally grabbed off the streets and thrown onto the practice squad, and he ended up making him look good. So the running back, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the guy they're invested in. He is the long-term answer. You may end up having to be patient for a year before that gets delivered, or you get him much cheaper this year than he went for last year, and you get a real bargain on your hands.
He definitely looks like a good dynasty buy low, because to your point, I mean, his value is only going to be going up after maybe, a little rough stretch this year, but 2022 and beyond should only be nothing but good things. And yeah, last year, pretty annoying committee throughout the season. Le'Veon Bell stuck his head in there and all that going on. But just look back at Andy Reid's coaching career. You're going to see Brian Westbrook tearing up the league, LaShawn McCoy, and look, you only have to go back to last April to find, Andy Reid comparing Clyde Edwards-Helaire to Brian Westbrook. So I know it hasn't gone quite that swimmingly just yet, everyone. But if Damian Williams is eventually gone, if not this year, next year, things will be looking better. But yeah, man, might be one of these situations where we got to treat, at least in redraft leagues, Clyde more of a lower end RB2 this time around, because it looks like that kind of featured role we're always hoping for might not be there in his pass heavy offense. Obviously a great real life problem for the Chiefs, but as fantasy managers, we're just looking for that volume any way we can find it. Awesome, man. We've talked a lot about these receivers already. I want to finish things off, though, before we get your bull call with a look at Travis Kelce. I mean, is this dude ever going to age? He turns 32 in October. I'm not saying that I expected a huge drop-off, but, the stats, he's 144 days younger than Gronk. We saw Zach Ertz fall off a cliff last year. It's just such a demanding position. And, looking at Kelce, he's going to age fantastically because he's playing with Patrick Mahomes, who wouldn't. But his yak looked as good as ever last year. This is ridiculous. Do you ever see Kelsey taking at some point. Anytime soon, do you see Kelsey taking a step back? Because, I feel like he just played his best football of his career. He was putting Denzel freaking Ward in a pretzel in the playoffs. No one can guard this guy. It seems like he's only getting better. I'm sorry I'm rambling here. I'm just still incredulous at how this is happening here. Is all the time ever going to catch this guy?
Yeah, the rambling is warranted, right? Because he's doing some amazing things. Set a record for yardage in a season by a tight end, was chasing being the first tight end ever to lead the league in receiving yardage. He's added the touchdowns to his game. And you mentioned the yak. I'm glad you did, because what happened last year was, and maybe it was him seeing, I'm not quite the athlete I was, and he ditched the trying to cut back and go back 2 yards to try to get 5 and think that he was as elusive as a wide receiver. And he started catching the ball and going upfield like he was a tight end. And whether that's just coaching, listen, Travis, I know you're athletic, but you're not that athletic. You're not Tyreek Hill. So stop trying to do that after you catch the ball. There were times he'd catch it and lose 2 or 3 yards. Now he catches it and he knows, hey, I got one move and I got to get upfield. And, he may not, get out in the open field, and maybe somewhere he might sacrifice one big catch, but he consistently gets more out of every reception now than he ever has. And that was something that was very noticeable last year. And I would certainly expect it to continue this year. It worked for him. Why would he fix what's not broken? So I do think he'll continue to be that kind of guy. And, they line him up. It's great that we as fantasy players get to use him as a tight end, because they line him up in the slot as a wide receiver so much when they're throwing the football. Really, he's detached from the line. And I think by being detached from the line and by the quantity of throws that the Chiefs have had, he hasn't been in the trenches. He hasn't gotten rolled up on. He hasn't, had 300-plus pound guys falling on him all the time after, he goes down on a block or something, or the running back plowing into the back of him and those kind of things. That wear and tear adds up. So I think he's worn more like a wideout, which is amazing, because a lot of people will forget that he missed his entire rookie season and had microfracture surgery on his knee. Now, maybe that'll raise it, rear up here later on, that, he's been brilliant and that knee will start barking at him at some point. He's had some little cleanup procedures at the end of years. That's the other thing you love about him. He plays hurt, right? There have been a number of years where it's like, well, he had this surgery or that surgery. And you didn't know it by the way he was playing on the field. So he is tough. He's not going to go down with any hangnail that comes around. And so that's a good thing for you. But no, I don't see why he would slow down now, because I think he is adapting and evolving. As an NBA player that threw down the dunks begins to drift out to shoot the threes, I think you're seeing Travis Kelce do that. He knows what it is. And I think Andy Reid knows how to handle him. So, look, I think there's a buyer beware on all Chiefs. I think they're all maybe a little bit inflated. I think if you're in auction leagues, maybe there's a way to handle that better. Maybe they come down price-wise after the bidding has been overblown on Tyreek Hill. Then you get bargains on some of the Chiefs' other guys. So I would always be aware. But the one thing, if you do overpay for a Chief, the ball is going to be in the air. The offense is going to push the ball down the field. They're going to be aggressive, because that's what Andy Reid does. So if you draft a few picks higher or you pay a few bucks more for a Chief, you have an offense that's committed to getting the ball down the field, and an offense that, frankly, is going to have a defense that has a lot to replace on its front seven next year. So if the defense takes a spot back, they maybe revert more to looking like 2018, where they had to win more shootouts. The defense played so much better the last 2 years that really brought down some of those offensive numbers. If it has to take a step back to take 2 steps forward, then next year could be a little bit more of a shootout year for this Chiefs offense as well.
Yeah, okay, you can say Mahomes, Hill, Kelsey, that they're inflated because they're each going to be, probably, one, Hill is going to be top 3, and Kelsey's obviously number 1 tight end, but for good reason. They've done nothing except ball the hell out over the past few years. Kelsey, 5 years running as fantasy's number 1 overall tight end. But you brought up a great point. He spent 55% of his snaps last year in the slot or out wide. But the thing is, I hear people, they go, oh, Travis Kelce's a wide receiver, like trying to call him soft. If you want to try to, insult Travis Kelce, call him a wide receiver, I think all you're doing is saying that he's underpaid, because his contract right now, for him to be making less than $15 million per year, man, you see why Jimmy Graham back in, 2012, 2013 was fighting to be franchise tagged as a wide receiver, not a tight end. I feel like Kelsey's going underpaid, man. I know they gave him that contract extension recently, so I guess he's happy with it. But for Watkins' original deal to land him more dollars per year than Kelsey, I just think it kind of speaks to tight end just kind of not being priced properly in the context of real life football and honestly fantasy as well. So, we can maybe say they're inflated, but honestly, the more we look at it, Travis Kelce might need to be a top 5, top 6 overall fantasy selection in drafts this coming year, because when you look at the difference between him and the next closest tight end, it's not even close, because he's truly playing a different position than almost every other tight end in the league.
He and George Kittle, right? Yeah. After that, who are you looking to grab? If
Darren Waller is at the bottom of that tier.
Yeah, that's right. I should probably add him too. Yeah, after those three, if you don't get
huge
one of those
drop off.
You're waiting and you're like, okay, I'll take whoever's at the bottom, because at that point the fourth tight end is maybe no better than the 24th tight end. So what's the point? So those three do really stand out. For fantasy baseball, they're hitting catchers. They're getting production for them. Mike Piazza behind the dish. Oh, wow, you get that guy. Your offense is so much better. You get one of these tight ends, it gets so much easier to get those numbers and win some games in your fantasy leagues. Absolutely.
And these tight ends, like, again, Waller, Kelsey, Kittle. Those are our really only, maybe Hawkinson gets there, but those are the only three guys we know that are the number one receivers on their team, even if they aren't technically called a wide receiver. So even if you happen to stumble upon a great late round tight end too, throw Kelsey in the flex. The dude almost led the league in receiving yards last year. Who cares what his positional designation is? Soren, fantastic stuff. You teased it earlier. Let's hear your bold offseason call for the Chiefs.
So I think there's a chance that the Chiefs go get Trent Williams. And this is one that would look like it's out of their price point. They've got about, when you put in their draft and you convert all of their roster bonuses to signing bonuses, which was the plan with Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones, Tyreek Hill, and Travis Kelce's contracts. They all have roster bonuses that can be converted to signing bonus, which means they can now push that out over the remaining years of the contract and bring that number down. They'll bring that down. That brings them down about $40 million. Throw in their draft, they get to around $5 or $6 million under. So they would seemingly not have the money to go after a Trent Williams. But if they cut both their tackles, that's another $15 million. I mentioned Lucas Niang, the third-round pick from last year, who was coming off a hip injury, and I talked to one personnel guy in the league, not with the Chiefs, that said, we had him graded as a first-rounder, but we didn't want to mess with the injury. So if he would be a first-round tackle, that's one answer. But Andy Reid has always had good tackles. He traded for Jason Peters when he was with the Eagles. He drafted Eric Fisher with his first pick to make sure he was there. And if they are not convinced that they're going to have somebody, Trent Williams, who was the highest graded offensive tackle in football last year, would be a guy that would be worthwhile. I think you also want to avoid the Russell Wilson, Deshaun Watson, Dak Prescott. The angry franchise quarterback is not something you want. And Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs have a brilliant relationship. And everybody in Kansas City will tell me when I bring this up on the radio, what are you talking about? He loves it here. Oh, everybody loves it when they just got paid. Deshaun Watson loved it in Houston for about a year, and then he won it out. I think getting that left tackle and telling Patrick Mahomes, we're going to protect you, and we've got an investment in another high, or a highly thought of tackle on the other side, I think would be good business. I think the Chiefs know, you win with offense, right? You finish games, hopefully with defense, but you're going to win with offense. There's going to be too many times you have the ball down a handful of points in a minute and a half to go. And if you can go down and score, the other team has no chance to win. Too many games end that way. I think the Chiefs know it. And I think if they're going to shock somebody, it would be to go out and get Trent Williams. I think there's a limit to how far they can go. But he's 32 years old. And I think a lot of people might say, well, it's a 3-year deal. It's whatever it is. The Chiefs, I think, could be a surprise contender to get Trent Williams. And I think maybe Moton from Carolina, they would be in that mix. But after that, I think they try to figure things out in-house, probably drafting an offensive tackle and knowing Brett Veach probably moving up in the first round to draft an offensive tackle, since in 3 drafts he has never moved down, and knowing that is a major priority for the Chiefs. But I think people could be surprised. Trent Williams' name isn't really being associated with the Chiefs, but I think they'll take a run at him, and if the market just grows too high, they'll bail out. But they could be – I think their swing will be a pretty good swing at him.
Love that call. And yeah, let's at least try to keep Mahomes happy, because that's the one kind of annoying part with the whole Russell Wilson saga. Because I think a lot of people have looked at Russ, who, when you can create the sort of magic that him, Mahomes, Watson can, yeah, they will take an unnecessary sack from time to time, because look at what happens sometimes when they're able to avoid that sack. But you just look at the Seahawks spending on the offensive line. They've been ranking towards the bottom of the league ever since Russ really started to get paid. So yes, invested resources in the offensive line. And even if, I mean, it's not fair to say that, the Buccaneers showed some fatal flaw to Mahomes. I mean, even with him under all sorts of pressure for the entire Super Bowl, we had arguably 2 drop touchdowns and another longer one to Kelsey that he couldn't hold on to as well. But yes, just because Mahomes, Russ, Watson, these quarterbacks are capable of, pulling the rabbit out of their hat on occasion, doesn't mean that they can't also invest some resources up front. So that would be fantastic to see.
Yeah, when you invest in those quarterbacks, don't you want to give them every opportunity to succeed?
Right.
Why would you buy a Ferrari and put a governor on it at 55 miles an hour, right? Like, what was the point of getting the Ferrari? You've got to let it get out on the highway and go, right? So I think the Chiefs understand that. They've got an offensive-minded head coach, and Andy Reid is always going to look to score points. And like I said, 2018, their defense was 31 in the league. Terrible, and they were one offsides call away from playing for the championship. So you're not going to overcome a bad offense. See what the Chiefs' offense ended up being with their offensive line decimated in the Super Bowl, 9 points. That can't be overcome. You're not going to win a Super Bowl 9-7 against anybody. So you've got to make sure that you can put points on the board, because you might be able to win one 34-31, 37-34.
I don't want to hurt Chiefs fans too much, but quickly on that D Ford's offside call, I didn't realize, shout out to Sam Schwartzstein, who a long time ago, not that long ago, helped create the XFL rules, but former Stanford offensive lineman. He pointed out when D Ford lined up offsides, if you look at the left tackle is arguably off the line in the offense's backfield. So D Ford was kind of just lining up regularly, and you could even, so yeah, sorry to remind everyone of that. But I mean, D Ford actually is probably getting the wrong, end of history here when you look at who he was lining up against. But that's a story for another day. Soren, fantastic stuff. Thank you again for the time. Everyone can follow you on Twitter at Soren Petro. We'll let people know where they can hear you and what you got on the agenda for the offseason.
Yeah, we're talking Chiefs football, all year, all off season. And I think this, the draft is always giant. The free agent moves are always giant. And as you mentioned, we're taping here on the 9th. We got cap day or franchise tag day. So there's always football. Football is a 365 sport. We'll be talking about it. You can hear us 810whb.com is where the stream comes in, and follow me on Twitter at Soren Petro, SorenPetro.
Fantastic stuff, and 100% agreed. Football all day, every day. We don't have time for these other ridiculous sports. Get out of here, everyone. He's Soren, I'm Ian. This has been the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you so much, everyone, for those of you that have been tuning in throughout the 32 for 32 series. We're going to be back to more regularly, just twice or thrice weekly shows here moving forward. Ahead of free agency, we're going to have Monday, Wednesday, and Friday shows. I'll be sure to shoot those out on my Twitter then. But until then, take care, everybody.